Okay, so welcome to our first SenseMaking session of the year, first community practice session of the year for 2022. And I'm really glad to see the new faces who have joined us. And your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, co-founder of SumMapping Greater Than the Sum, and Kara Martner, who's our producer and helps with lots of other kinds of things as well. And so for those of you who are new, and because I've been told I should give better groundings for these sessions, and so I'm trying to practice what people tell me to do. I'm going to let you know what this is, so that you can decide if this is the right place for you today or not, and to give you a little help you just kind of understand what we're all about. So first of all, this is a vision about a possibility. So there's this kind of mapping that we'll refer to frequently in all of our sessions called social system mapping. And we believe, those of us who are part of this community, believe that this kind of mapping can help communities and change networks become self-organizing more quickly and more wisely, and can catalyze greater potential in all kinds of collective transformation initiatives. So at the highest level, this is about leaning into that possibility and turning our vision into reality. It's also an opportunity to learn about this kind of mapping, as well as to get familiar with and literate in the body of theory that supports our belief in the potential, and that informs our mapping practice, and that is an essential ingredient of our map mining process. It's also an opportunity to contribute your own experience and expertise to this emerging mapping practice, because it's not just about theory, it's also about lived experience and insight into the dynamics of people working together. And I know that if you're shown up here, you have some insights and thoughts about that. It's a community practice and a field building with an intent for all of us to become carriers of a culture of generative transformation. So social system mapping is foundational to this community, but not all of us are mappers. Some of us are here to learn about mapping, to learn how to do it. Others are here to help inform the practice. Others are here out of curiosity about what's possible. And others are here just because of the community itself, because we love each other and we want to be part of something interesting. So if you would like to join us for whatever of those reasons, we warmly invite you to do so. And then lastly, it's about a relationship to a particular social system map that represents and is a sort of scaffolding for our own community. Because if we believe that a map can make a difference, and if we know we need a community to achieve our vision, then we actually need to have our own community map, both for learning how to use a map to achieve our goals and for helping us become more transformational. And so we have our own social system map, which I'll give you a brief look at in a minute. So that's what this is about. It's just one small session within this much larger context aimed at systemic transformation. And so if, having heard all of that, you feel like you're in the wrong place and don't want to stick around, feel free to jump off and use your hour in a way that works for you better. But just know that there would be no hard feelings, and you're always welcome to return whenever you want to. So having said all that, today's objectives would be for you to come away with a sense of the potential that we're inspired by, to meet some cool folks and to feel welcomed by them. Another one would be, we would hope that you're at least a little curious about human systems dynamics, which we're going to talk about, and social system mapping. And lastly, that you feel inspired to practice or try out the adaptive action cycle that I'm going to talk about somewhere. So those are our objectives. Our agenda today, we're going to be talking about social system mapping, which we call SSM for short, and human systems dynamics, or HSD for short. I'm going to talk a little bit about the HSD theory of change, and the adaptive action cycle, and why we're relating HSD to social system mapping into our community practice. We're going to have 2 breakout sessions, so introductions to each other, then to the map, then a brief breakout session with people that you will be in for a longer breakout session further on. Then I'll address some of the theory, longer breakouts, and then we'll do report backs and review and some community announcements. So before we go any further, let's start with finding out a little bit about who you are. And to do this, we're going to use this presentation and input tool called Mentimeter, which is what I'm presenting from. And Kara's going to put a link to Mentimeter into the chat right now. And so if you use the link in the chat, you should be able to open up Mentimeter, or you can do it on your phone. If you want to do it on your phone, here's the instructions for doing that. And if you are being able to get into Mentimeter, give me a thumbs up when I'm going to just, okay. Hold on a second. Okay, welcome, Min. If you want to do a quick mic check, you can. I didn't give you a chance earlier.
Oh, I have a lot of background noise here. Hi, everyone. I'm Min Ma from MXM Research Group in Boston.
Thank you. You do have background noise. You have somebody pounding. Mary, do you want to do a quick mic check? You're muted. You're still muted. And while Mary's getting herself unmuted, and all of you who have gotten Mentimeter open, you should be in a slide now where you can, that asks you to input your name, pronouns, location, network or networks that you're supporting in some way. Put all of those into one field so we can learn who's here, where you are. Mary, now it looks like you're.
Good morning.
Good morning. No problem. Thanks. So I'll go ahead and give you a moment to get those in there. And just so if you're not familiar with Mentimeter, a thing you want to keep in mind is that you will now have when I'm sharing the screen, you might be seeing the Mentimeter presentation in my screen share, but you'll also then have access your own browser for inputting information. So just if you're trying to put in information and it's not looking right, it's because you try the other way of looking at it. Wow, Dominique, you're coming from far away. And another far away, Olivia. That's really fun.
Still planet Earth.
Pardon me?
Still planet Earth.
Yeah, yes.
I think most of the time.
It's great. Welcome, everyone. So this is wonderful to get to see, especially love to see the things that people are. Legal hackers community, interesting. Okay, I'm gonna move on. You guys will all get to, oh, and so I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Oh no, that's not what I'm gonna do, sorry. I'm gonna stop, hang on. Am I sharing? I'm not sharing. I am sharing. Jeez. I am so out of practice. This is amazing. So I was going to quickly also show you. So this is so for those of you who haven't seen a social system map, this is one view of our community social system map. So this is the one that I'm telling you we all have a relationship to. As you can see, oh, that's not where I wanted to be open, but the nodes on the map are people, and the lines on the map are the people's relationships. And as you can see, so this is us. And if you click on a node, you can see more. So there's me, you can see a bunch of information about me, or about who else is here. Mary is here, Jim is here, Brian is here. Where'd Ben go? I know Ben is on here. So if you're part of our community, we will want you to ask you kindly to be on our map so that we can help you be more connected and learn more about you. Also, in this map, if you click on a link, the lines, you can see more about the relationship of the members in the network, how they connect, a little story about them, etc. So all of this stuff is in our map, and we will provide links for you later to be on it yourself. And if you're on the map and you haven't updated your connections lately, we love for you to do that as well. So I'm going to move on now. So this is just another piece of getting to know you, is there should be a poll now in your Mentimeter input place, asking how familiar you are with social system mapping. We want to know, obviously there are people present who are really familiar with it, who do it professionally, and there are people here who don't even know what this is about. So that's great. We're going to pair you up so that people you can the more experienced people can help you get familiar, but it's good to know how many we have in each of those categories so that we can just be aware of what's going on for people. So if you go ahead and go back into Mentimeter and put in your experience level, and I'm seeing, oh, okay, it's just like everybody did. And then how familiar you are also with human systems dynamics. So again, could be totally unfamiliar, or could be very, I'm a professional at it. Okay. Okay, cool. So it looks like we don't have anyone here who's like totally, I've never heard of this, I have no idea what you're talking about, but, and we don't have anybody also who is a professional. So we'll be in this, that sort of middle of learning together, which is great. So for those of you for whom what a social system map, for whom this is totally new, a social system map is basically a mix of all these different, a mashup of all these different kinds of maps: a system map, a stakeholder map, an asset map, a social network map, a concept map. And although there's a lot of visual similarities amongst all these maps and a social system map, what's different and unique about a social system map is that it includes the dimensions, whichever you want to include, from all of these kinds of maps all at once. So it's far more layered and dense and complex than any one of these kinds of maps are on their own. It's also more of a process than a product. It's online, interactive, accessible to all network members, iterative and emergent and dynamic, and not a one-time snapshot, but it evolves over time. So that's what a social system map is at a very high level. What it's about is systemic transformation. So social system mapping is essentially meant to support a global movement that's working to shift from systems of dominance and exploitation and extraction to systems of connection and reverence and regeneration. And we recognize that the foundational structure for this global systemic shift is strong networks of wise change agents. But, and networks are the most ubiquitous structure in the world. So you'd think that it would come naturally for us to enact change through collaboration networks. But what we've learned in the past decade or two of this work is that social change networks are actually really challenging. And so many people believe that the reason that large-scale systemic transformation is so hard, and therefore the reason that collaborative networks can be so challenging, is due to basically two fundamental worldviews that are simply ground into our modern, especially our Western cultures. And they're so deep that we're generally not even aware of them, but they inform everything we do. And my guess is that everybody here already knows this, but what I'm doing is trying to make a connection between these fundamental worldviews and how social system mapping can be helpful. And so the two worldviews that we like to keep in mind are the separate self. So that idea that, you know, everyone has to look out for themselves, that human nature is just, you know, dog eat dog, survival of the fittest, and that there's really nothing we can do about that, that's just human nature. And so we have to live with it, take care of our own survival, and leave others to fend for themselves. So that separate self worldview really causes problems when we're trying to work together. The other thing that is problematic is a linear mechanistic understanding of how change happens. So all of the larger systems that we talk about transforming are what we call complex adaptive systems. And those just don't work like machines do. We can't control them and we can't predict what will happen. So we need to have a different understanding of how change happens in complex adaptive systems than the kinds of approaches that grew out of the old Newtonian, old school Newtonian worldview. So we think that social system mapping works on both of those levels and can help reshape our thinking as well as our actions when it's done well. It undermines the separate self worldview because of the visual dimension that helps us start to comprehend how the structures of relationships are impacting our work. And it helps us generate stronger and more mutually supportive and more strategic relationships. And it also can be used as a complexity thinking tool, a way of learning how to see patterns in complexity that is in a context that's meaningful and relevant. Like this is a context that's very meaningful and relevant for me and for a handful of us who are here. And that it can inform wiser action and help all of us become better at managing in complexity. So that's what social system mapping is and what it's about. And before I talk anymore, we're gonna have you break out into breakout sessions. I think what we'll do, Kara, is just pair up. I think you may have already made room, so tell me what you did, I'm sorry.
Sure, depending on what you wanted to do, since we have kind of a batch of existing folks and newbies, I did 2 different rooms with a group of 4 and a group of 5, but if you wanted me to break it down smaller, I could.
Who prefers the big groups? Raise your hand. 1, 2. Who prefers smaller groups? 1, 2, 3, 2. Okay, so let's break them up into pairs or in a group of 3. Sorry, I should have brought that up earlier. So while Kara's getting that set up, what I'll have you do is introduce yourselves again, and then just share your level of experience with social system mapping and with HSD. And know that you will be back in the same breakouts later on for longer. So this is just a taste to get to know each other. And then there'll be more discussion later, more opportunity for connection later. You ready?
Yep.
Anybody have any questions before we break you out? Okay. 5 minutes with a 1-minute warning at 4 minutes. Go ahead. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good, started a good conversation. And okay, I'm gonna, so we can and we do use all kinds of theories and frameworks to inform our mapping, but for these sense-making sessions that take place on the first Monday of every month, we mostly focus on the models and methods developed by Glenda Ouyang, founder of the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. Glenda has been developing this body of work for over 30 years or roughly, through lots of collaboration with her 3 sisters. So there's like these 4 sisters sort of working all this stuff out with their research and study, and all of whom are teachers, as were their parents. So, so teaching is at the very heart of this work, much more so than abstract theory, which is different from most approaches to systems thinking, which are generally far more theoretical and less about teaching and about application. And so I've been studying this stuff for nearly 20 years myself, and I have found HSD to be the most accessible, applicable, flexible, and down-to-earth, sensible approach to systems thinking that I've ever come across. And so for our purposes of learning how to mine the value of a social system map, it really gives us a lot to work with, and applying it is not hard to do. So that's why we're focusing on HSD in these sessions, even though other approaches could also be very relevant. So I'm going to, next I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to see if I can do that. Share a video of Glenda Ouyang talking about complex adaptive systems. It's just 3.5 minutes.
You had also mentioned complex adaptive
Can everybody hear that? Is that seeing? Okay, great.
systems a little earlier. Can you explain the concept of that and how that again fits into adaptive action?
Yes, so one of the threads that feeds into human systems dynamics is a history of systems sciences and systems thinking. So in the US, people tend to think about one particular kind of systems language, systems dynamics modeling. But around the world, other people use many other ways to think and talk about systems. The one that we find to be most useful with human systems is called complex adaptive systems. And a complex adaptive system is a collection of agents. They may be people, or they may be businesses, or they may be ideas that interact with each other. And as they interact, a pattern shows up. And once the pattern is there, it influences how the agents behave in the future. I'm going to give you an example. If you think about culture in this way, you can see that culture, individuals and procedures and policies and histories and traditions and identities and customers, all of them interacting. And over time, a pattern shows up that we would recognize as culture. And once that institutional culture begins to form, it constrains how people are going to behave in the future. So when some new employee comes in, it doesn't take them long to fall into the patterns that are culture in a place, and then they reinforce that. If an employee comes who doesn't fit the culture, it's very hard for them to feel comfortable in the cycle of this complex adaptive process. So complex adaptive system is a collection of agents that interact in unpredictable ways, create patterns that influence how the system acts in the future. One of the most important things about complex adaptive systems in human systems is that they work at all the different levels where people interact. So I can think about the complex adaptive systems inside myself. Physically, my cells act together to create organs, and my organs together to create systems, and the systems act together to create health. So at all those different scales, physically, we have complex adaptive systems. Then I can think of a relationship. My 32-year marriage was definitely an emergent pattern over interactions over time. And teams. You can think about a high-performing team as a pattern that emerges, or an organization, or an industry. We do lots of work with national patterns of conflict or oppression, or the kinds of relationships that political structures take as emergent patterns from interactions of agents. So you can find one way to think about things that works across many different contexts and levels. So that's a complex adaptive system.
You had also mentioned.
So that's when we're talking about complex. So as Glenda implied, once a system has generated specific patterns of interaction, those patterns can seem to become more powerful than the actors in the system. So they create a strong reinforcing feedback loop that works to keep the system behaving according to certain patterns over time. And so then the million-dollar question is, especially for those of us who are working on creating better systems, once this feedback loop of action, actors, and patterns is developed, how do we change those dynamics if they're not serving us anymore? Well, so first of all, the core insight of everything we do regarding systemic transformation is to understand that it's not a switch that we can flip. We all know that transformation is not something that we can plan out and control, like, make a chain of dominoes where we can set up a path and then tip the first domino and you start a whole, chain of events that where we know where it's going to end up. It doesn't work that way. So we can't command and control and predict complex adaptive systems. But what we can do is to set the conditions that will influence the direction of change as it responds to the environment. But so what does that mean, and how do we do that? Well, setting and shifting those conditions is a praxis. So like Paulo Freire said, that liberation is a praxis, the action and reflection of men and women upon their world in order to transform it. And this is true of all intentional transformation aimed at creating better human systems. It requires that cycle of action and reflection that Freire refers to. And so this is how that praxis is expressed in the HSD theory of change. There's this complex adaptive system that Glenda described and that we want to transform. And then there's this praxis of action and reflection, which in HSD is called, we call the adaptive action cycle. So we reflect on the patterns in the system, then we take action in the system, then we reflect on the state of the system after our action, and then we reflect again. And that creates a sort of flywheel that then catalyzes and energizes change without planning it out and without controlling it. And so that HSD praxis involves developing and increasing our ability to see, understand, and influence the patterns that hold the systems together. And if we're talking about large-scale system change, then this praxis is, this is a praxis that we all need to be developing, everybody who's working on system change, not just at some leadership or expert level, but at all levels. And it's a praxis that we need to do together, combining our seeing, combining our understanding, and combining our influencing so that we can maximize our potential for transformation. And so from a mapping perspective, this praxis extends to mining value from social system mapping as well, which is why we're talking about all of this in the context of sense-making with our mapping practice. So this is something that we're working on in our community, which is how can we develop a collective practice of using the map to reflect on our community, take action towards our goals, and then reflect again. So how do we do that adaptive action cycle in HSD? We'll walk through it at high level together now, and Kara is also going to put a guide to it in the chat and in a follow-up email after our session. So the first step is what's happening? What do you notice? What patterns are coming up? What is surprising you or others? What is the data saying? The idea here is to notice the system and to look at it from some piece of it that we're wanting to change, focusing on something that's problematic. So right off the bat, we're not trying to take in the entire system, all the moving parts and all the interactions. We just need to look at the part of it that's bothering us at the moment. So what's going on? What in the systems environment is part of this problem? So this can be at whatever scale is relevant. So for instance, if we do it with our social system map, we might look and say, oh, one thing I noticed is that Christine is really super central and is the most densely connected person on that map. So that's just one simple observation of data that we could take from looking at that map. And likely we would pull several more data points, but that's the what phase. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? Then the so what phase. So what might that mean? So what are the results? So what would we like to have happen? So what are the potential applications? So what is the background? So the so what phase is when we reflect on what we've perceived, we interpret, we make inferences. So regarding the observation that I'm central to the map, we might ask, so what's the backstory that created this pattern? Or so what would we like the network to look like? And what we might say in the so what phase about our map is we might say that we would like for our network to have more hub and spoke nodes, that we want there to be more small clusters and to not have everything flowing through me. And then the now what phase. So now is what is one small doable action that I can take to make a difference. So, and this needs to be something that you can do. So with our map, where we saw how central I am and we want there to be more clusters, it might be to start a discussion with the core members of the community to see what needs to change to enable them to exert more agency and to start their own initiatives within the community. So the idea behind picking one small doable thing is so that it can happen as soon as possible and that you can start the cycle all over again to reflect on how your action worked out, what changed, what you learned, what you might repeat or not repeat. So whatever your now what is, you don't turn it into a several step action plan that will take a long time to implement. Because if it takes too much time, by the time it's done, things will have changed in the environment. It will be harder to assess the impact of your action. You'll have missed your opportunities to recalibrate and adjust as you go. And you might end up very far from where you were expected because you weren't paying attention to the emerging dynamics. So the idea is that we generate lots of these little cycles and small doable shifts in patterns going on all the time in multiple places and at multiple scales. And so Glenda says that the old school mechanistic command and control approach to change consumes energy. And in my experience, it consumes tons of energy, whereas the adaptive action cycle releases energy for driving change. It also helps us to be more hopeful because we know there's always some small thing that we can do, and then we can see how it worked. It makes us more innovative and it helps us to get unstuck. So this cycle in and of itself is really powerful, but there's one more piece of HSD, the HSD theory of change, and that has to do with inquiry and with our mental models. So it doesn't do us as much good as it could to use adaptive action if we simply keep applying the same perspectives and assumptions over and over. So we also have to work on our questions. Because as David Cooper, writer, who probably you're aware of, who created Appreciative Inquiry, we live into the world. We live in the world that our questions create. So if we want to transform our world, we have to transform our questions. And transforming our questions requires transforming the way we think. And so that leads us to this last part of the HSD theory of change. So complex system, we're watching it, we're doing an adaptive action cycle to shift the patterns and seeing what happens. But in the process of doing our adaptive action cycle, we also use different models and methods to help us look at the situation from different perspectives and to help us formulate questions that we might not otherwise ask. So, as I alluded to, Glenda has distilled much of systems theory into a whole bunch of very simple and accessible models and methods. So for our purposes, as I said, we're generally using her formulations, and we will focus on some of those in future sense-making sessions. But Glenda will be the first to say that any framework or any process can fit in here. Anything that helps us to see the system better and to think about it from more angles can be really useful. And so, how all this relates to social system mapping is that social system mapping is the best, most information-packed model of a network or a community that we currently have access to. It gives us a lens into the complex adaptive systems of our own networks that we can't get any other way, as well as insights into the patterns that our networks are generating. So to return to what I said earlier on, that systemic transformation requires networks of wise change makers, and that change networks are really challenging. If we use a social system map in an adaptive action cycle to see, understand, and influence the underlying mental models that make networks so challenging, then according to all of our theory, social system mapping should be able to help our networks become less difficult, more energizing and inspiring, and more effective. So we would be strengthening that foundational structure of large-scale systemic transformation in our practice. And that's the vision, that's the potential, that's the goal. So when we're dealing with change networks, we can include a social system map among the models and methods that we often plug into this adaptive action cycle. We can also plug various models and methods in an adaptive action cycle into a social system map. So we can use all the different models and correspond them together to gain new insights. And if we're explicit and transparent in how we're using this praxis, then the community, so for instance, you all who are here, can start to see more than just this, sort of crazy map that is kind of overwhelming, and they can start to learn themselves how to make sense of complex piles of information and how to take wise action in uncertain contexts. And then everyone can take what they learned from our network and mapping activities and applying the thinking and methods to the broader systems where there isn't a map, because we've adapted the patterns of thinking that give us deeper insight into seeing, understanding, and influencing patterns in all kinds of contexts. So I'm gonna stop sharing there for a moment. And look at the time and try to remember where we should be at. And we're gonna, so first I just wanted also, but in Mentimeter, if you wouldn't mind, just I have a brief poll about where you're at cognitively. I want to just see how well people are absorbing what we've said so far. So if you would go into your back into Mentimeter, there should be a slide asking how you're feeling at the moment, and I will share my screen so we can all see that together. Okay, everybody's got it. No, that's one person, sorry. One person's got it. Curious. And so Kara, given where we're at with time, I'm thinking we can give them 20 minutes in the breakouts with a minute warning. Okay. So no one is saying they're dying of boredom yet, which is a good thing. And we've got most people ready to want it, ready and eager to talk about it. And a little bit of confusion, but not a lot. So great. So let's go ahead and have you go back into your breakout rooms. You have 20 minutes. Oh, and the discussion prompts are, where do you already, so we all know that this adaptive action cycle, that's not rocket science. It's really common sense. What makes it interesting is that that's kind of like how we naturally learn things. But when we get into an organizational context and we start creating strategic plans, we adopt this whole different mindset that is this much more command and control multi-step thing that is not nearly as much of an adaptive action. So where do you already use something that looks like this in your daily life? And what might be the potential for using it more rigorously and intentionally, for instance, in your change work? So I think Kara put those prompts into the chat. And so those are your question prompts, and then just whatever else is confusing to you if you want to get some help sorting it out or thinking about it from another perspective. Go for it. So Brian and Min, how did anything? Thoughts?
It was a very nice conversation.
Yeah, good.
It was. I wrote down a few takeaways that Brian left me with, but one was even thinking about my relationship as an evaluator with the practitioners that I support, and that their feedback loops even within that relationship, which I hadn't spotted before.
Cool, great, good. So looks like we don't have, oh, there's Jim. So welcome back. Hope you had good conversations. Looks like sounds like some of you did. And I just want to, so I'm going to just do a quick screen share, and then we'll open it up and have some conversation. But so to do an adaptive action cycle here for this hour, what just happened? What are we doing? We just got introduced to the concept of complex adaptive systems, the human systems dynamics theory of change, the adaptive action cycle, and how all that fits with social system mapping. And so, so what? So this is where I'd love to hear from you, input in Mentimeter, and also we'll just, so either put it into Mentimeter or say it out loud into the space one at a time, but we have time for a few of you. What's coming up for you in response to this information and the discussion that you just had in your breakout groups? So what is this all mean? What meaning does all this have for you right now? So feel free to either write it or if anybody wants to say it out loud. Min, do you want to tell everybody what you're just telling us? No, you don't have to, but yeah.
Oh, I'm happy to share. I don't know if it's going to make sense out of context or without the discussion that we had, but just one of my takeaways is Brian helped me recognize that as I'm an evaluator and I work with folks to look at the systems that and to plan their work and learn and, you know, develop feedback loops. But Brian pointed out that my relationship with a practitioner has its own feedback loops as well. And that was really useful to me.
Thanks. Does anybody else have anything that came up for them that they want to share? Thinking about using HSD as a practice. Yeah, it has, I have to say, using HSD as a practice has, I took the whole training and became a practitioner just about a year ago. And it has really changed how I've been dealing with this community and my work in general in ways that have been really helpful. So, others? Ben?
Well, I just dropped something in through Mentimeter, but I misspelled the tool that Dominique is developing. It's Hunome, I believe, and it just led me to the broader question, you know, of how with so many different tools out there, you know, we're very interested in using a particular set of tools that you know, you've developed, Christine, and you know, how does that fit into a larger ecosystem?
Anyone else? Thoughts from anyone else? Questions? Anything you want to say into the space? Pamela, go ahead.
Thank you. This is really fascinating. I've really enjoyed meeting the woman that I've had an opportunity to have an exchange with, and what was very opaque and formidable to me in my initial approach to the mapping through the group that I'm with has immediately gained some kind of clarity and relevance, but I also see that it's a real muscle to exercise and it takes practice. But yeah, encouraging the usefulness of this. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for that. Anyone else? So I'm looking at the so what and seeing the one that came up was the importance of considering ownership and how do you encourage people to take ownership. And I'm just wondering if anyone who's been doing this practice for a while would like to address that question.
Doing this practice for a while? You mean social systems mapping?
Yeah, how do you encourage people to take ownership of the map?
Well, that's a segue into the 6 Conversations promo, isn't it?
Well, it wasn't literally, no. I have that segue coming up, but I just wanted to say, but I do think
that's the immediate answer that comes to me is that, you know, you need to talk about ownership, that you know, and have people recognize that it's a choice, and also structure whatever the engagement is, the space, as a place where shared ownership is invited, right? That you come into a space or an engagement or a piece of work, and it's being framed as something to be collectively held, as opposed to we're coming into someone else's house. So I think that's, you know, and that can be very tricky with a map. That there is a tendency for people to look at a map as some other person's project, and yes, it's showing me my network, but it's not my map. And then the map can tend to just be an artifact, right? So that's part of what we're working on a lot is how you create ongoing engagement with the map so that people take on a stance of shared ownership because they recognize that it's valuable to them, and what, you know, how much that they also have impact. I think that's got to be part of it, that whatever is going on, they have some say in.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else want to just add to what Ben just said? Jim, you're muted. Yep.
Yeah. So the thought was that if people could see from the map that other people had similar intentions, had resources that were applicable for whatever the project is that someone might take ownership for, if you could see from the map there are other people that are intensely interested, then I think, and if the resource, if you can see the resources, so we were talking about funding in our group, how, if you know there's funding for something that you might take ownership for, it's an incentive to go ahead and step in. If you can see there are resources and other people that are willing to do this work and are excited by it, you might be willing more to self-organize. So I think the map has a way of making that visible, the resources and the relationships within a community. It sort of came out of our conversation.
Cool. Anyone else want to add to that? Mary, I'm wondering about you. You don't have to, but I'm just wanting to give you space if you had something you want to add. You're muted. No. Was that a no? You're muted, so I can't hear what you're saying. Okay. So just a thing that I would add to it, that is one of the reasons we're doing these sense-making sessions and we're doing this digging into HSD, is that I also think that part of ownership is helping people learn how to actually get value from the map. So, like Pamela, like you said, it can just be this really confusing, weird thing. And if people don't have some kind of frameworks that help them learn how to break it down into manageable pieces that they can interact with and get value from, which takes a different mental, set of mental models and tool sets. If we don't help them do that, it's less likely to get a lot of engagement. So that's why we're doing the sense-making sessions, so that we can help mappers sort of start to frame this and then share it and teach it to other people as well. That it is a muscle to practice. Yeah. Mary, sorry.
Sorry, I'm having Monday morning technical post-holiday confusion here.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned something that I've also read similar to. We make our world through the questions we ask. And so something that I'm thinking about is we do want sort of standard types of questions, but what are the questions that sort of help us create the world we want, and also related to our social systems mapping? And so those are the sorts of things I'm thinking about, and what we talked about a little bit in the small group session.
Cool, thanks. So we did what? Just did some so what, now what? So now is, what is one small action that you can take in either in the context of our community of practice or in a different context, your own context somewhere else? What's one small thing that you can actually do? That and there's a space in Mentimeter to put that, but I'd also love to hear thoughts. And just to, we will get into, let's just make this also about, so I'm segueing into the announcements, and because some of what we're doing here is we're not just talking about it, but we're learning to practice it, and we're learning to practice it transparently within our community. And so let's start with Ben. Ben, if you want to say how one of the ways you've been stepping into this sort of muscle we're building, and what you're holding and inviting others into.
Is this the segue to 6
This is the segue, yeah. Yes.
I'm still like, what did I learn from this and what step can I take? And I thought I was supposed to type something in Mentimeter, but you were just sharing the prompt, right? It's not actually.
Yeah, and I was just being my normal anxious self, thinking no one's going to put anything in there, so I'm not seeing anything. So
You
maybe
can't right now.
Say-
When I went there, it wasn't accepting an answer. It just has the question.
Oh, I must have made that the wrong slide. Okay, so
That must be why you're not seeing anything show up. You can't do it.
okay, so let's have you go ahead and say your thing, and then we'll let others, if whatever's coming up, we'll hear, and then we'll go to Jim, and then we'll go to Mary if Mary wants to say where she's at with this. But go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, and this is not so much something coming out of our conversation today as a now what the intervention system, but something we've been cooking up for a little while. As a bunch of you know, there's a conversational process known as the 6 conversations developed by the consultant Peter Block for communities that are seeking to be agents of systemic transformation. And it's about shifting the patterns of our relationship and having the kinds of conversations we need to have if we're serious about doing that work, because it's serious and challenging work. So we're starting this with 2 intensive sessions next week and the following week on Tuesdays at what is it, 11 a.m. Central, US Central Time, noon Eastern, just 6 o'clock Central European Time in the evening, I think. 2 longer sessions each of the next 2 Tuesdays, and then we're going to go into short sessions each Tuesday thereafter. And you don't have to do them all. You can come in at any point. But it's a way, first and foremost, to just connect to one another. That at the heart of all of this is the idea that being in relationship is part of the change, and driving our work together from a place of connection and relationship to one another and to the larger communities and systems we're part of has to be the ground for things, right, to get into a frame other than just the separate self. So I'm very excited to do that, and I can put a little invitation doc into the chat for those of you that haven't seen it. Kara's been sending out email blasts to announce it. I think there's going to be another one going out soon too. But I would love to see all of you who are here come join us if you want and check that out. It's a great way to get to know each other more and to really get in touch with what matters most to you and share that.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah. So that's sort of a now what that has grown out of these kinds of conversations about our community and more people taking agency, and how do we shift the structure, the relational structures in our community. So that's one of the things that's come out of that. But and there's a couple more we'll talk about. But before we go to that, what's coming up for you? Like, where can you, anyone, where can you, have you thought of applying this, or what's the next step you can do? Love to hear that from anybody who would like to share. And Ben did just put a link to the document, the invitation in the chat for the 6 conversations, and that will allow you to, there's a link to a form in there for registering. So you have that. Coming up for anybody? Next, now what?
Well, I'm thinking about questions that we could ask, which is what we're interested in terms of as part of our adaptive cycle. And it seems like this community is really involved in different ways of working and the evolution of how we work with what we do. And so I'm interested in looking at questions that relate to how we work more specifically. The sort of ways we're experimenting. It's difficult to sort of articulate the question, which I realized with my partner this morning of, what questions would you ask? But I think in general, we need to be talking about the questions we asked in the past, and some of which were part of the colonizing sort of picture, and what questions do we want to ask in the future, and that are part of a different way of working.
Yes. Others, it's coming up a way you can apply adaptive action in your work or lives or in this community, whatever.
Hi, this is, has been my first time here, and it's been really fantastic to hear all these dimensions of the thinking. All the things that you've said just resonated very, very much. And I don't come from, from that theoretical background. So for me to have that sense of resonance from practical work that I've done in futures, so foresight, strategic foresight, scenario planning, and then now with my my startup that also has its background in that futures thinking, where systems thinking is part of it as well. So the applications are they're there, and I think I need to study more the tools that you use and how you use them in order to immediately kind of have that sense, okay, this is how I'm going to apply it, or this is a kind of an immediate takeaway, practical takeaway for me to my work. But yeah, it's it's a bit like when I stumbled across the whole futures thinking group of field, as it may be called, and found home. This is another one where I can just clearly see that you guys are doing what needs doing in the world. With Ben was really lovely in pointing out many different things for me to go study a bit more as well. And so it's a I'm going to go study takeaway for me from this meeting. But yeah, really appreciate the work that you are doing and the community is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Anyone else?
Well, I'll toss this out there, and you can tell me whether or not I'm getting it right, getting the process right. But what we have a concrete problem in a subgroup around a project in the group that I'm with, and with another member who has had a similar experience as I with this same kind of problem. So I guess that we have gone so far as to see that there is a pattern that has occurred in a couple of different situations, at least, where we've got a shared experience with what made the project not go so well. And so what we're working on now, and what I'm finding encouragement for with this process, is entering a phase of reflection. And my thought is to introduce to the group at large an opportunity to reflect on the project in a way that brings out, I guess, more clarity about an understanding of, well, is our hypothesis for what the problem is, which is communication, does that land for other people? That's kind of like the outline of that. I would be interested in your feedback on what I'm thinking in terms of how it fits into the question you're asking of us.
So I think that actually sounds like a deeper conversation, so that I can have a better sense of what you're talking about, which I would love to have. So we could, if you'd like to schedule time, that'd be fine. I mean, we could do that. But it sounds like the general, you have a next step. So you said, okay, there's a problem. You know, what are we, I've given some thought to the problem, or let's collectively look at so represent it collectively. That's your inner next step. So you've sort of done a what in your own head and a so what in your own head. And then you've come up with the now what that you just voiced, which is now I'm going to have this conversation at another level with the group. So then you sort of already just did a cycle, and now you're proposing the next step of that cycle to do together. Yeah, cool. So I want to just give Jim a minute to, Jim's doing another one of our adaptive action cycle processes that we're trying to be transparent with and make a broader part of the community. So Jim, you can go ahead and do your announcement.
It's the segue is really the now what for me, which is the adaptive action cycle is sort of, you know, one of the engines of this whole process. And Christine, you really laid the whole scope out so beautifully today. I just keep seeing it evolving and getting more and more clear, and the adaptive action cycle and how we use it in the social system mapping context of using the social system maps to highlight, identify the patterns, how that flows in, wanting to make that more concrete. So the initiative that I'm proposing is basically just having this conversation in the COP about clarifying the adaptive action cycle relative to using the social system map process to highlight how those patterns get identified and then acted upon. So if you have any interest or inkling about this, want to do it, any of this work in a small group with us, just send me an email. We'll figure out how that works. But you can expect to see something coming from a small group of us over the next few weeks regarding making the adaptive action cycle concrete. And that's my email in the chat.
And I heard, one of the things I heard you say when you planned this was to make something that is concrete. So it's like a tangible item, an artifact that people can not only use for accessing, having more clarity about the adaptive action cycle related to the map in our community, but also have something to take home that you can use in your own communities, that you can sort of copy from how we're doing it and adapt to your context as a starting point, as a foundation for how do we do this creating ownership? How do we do this building this muscle together? This is our sort of stab at documenting how we imagine doing it at the moment, and would love your input on that if you're interested. Okay, well, it just was really great hearing from everyone, and really thank you all for showing up. And we have a little goodbye ritual we do, which I'm going to invite us all to do now, which is we all unmute. I count down 3, 2, 1, and then we all give each other blessings, greetings, love for the day, and we all go on our way, feeling loved and appreciated. So if everybody who wants to do this, go ahead and unmute your mic, and I will count down. Give you another second to unmute. And 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
The entire year. Thank you all.
Hope to see
Good to
you.
meet you,
Great
Mary.
start to 2022.
Thanks so much.